Okay, so I know this isn't one of my usual CNC lore videos, but I want to take a little break from those and talk about Starfield, since it's really the only other game I've been playing the past couple of weeks. Overall, I've enjoyed the time playing the game, but I think for me personally, the biggest disappointment are the Outposts. Also, this is going to be more of an off-the-cuff kind of video, so it's not going to have any real fancy editing or refined audio compared to my usual videos. So for those unfamiliar, Outposts are basically the base building system in Starfield. You can land on a planet or moon, plop down an outpost beacon, and provided you have the necessary materials, start constructing a base. This base could be dedicated to extracting nearby resources and sending them to other outposts, or just simply act as your own custom player home. What I was expecting was a system that improves upon what was established in Fallout 4's settlement building system, which, while very janky, was fun. In fact, the settlement system is the main reason why I spent so much time playing Fallout 4, even after I had completed all of the questing and exploration in that game. Unfortunately, while the outpost system in Starfield does provide a couple of improvements over Fallout 4's settlement system, it's still lacking the depth that it could have. Now, I know that some people will say that the entire game of Starfield is lacking depth, which I think is true to a certain extent. But for this video, I mainly want to focus on the outpost system, and put out some ideas on how the system could be improved, and make it something that is more worth the player's time to invest in. As I mentioned, there are two primary uses of outposts: building your own player home and gathering resources. The thing about outposts acting as player homes is that player homes already exist in the major urban centers, and all you really have to do to attain them is pay a one-time substantial fee of credits. Unless you want a house in New Atlantis, then you first have to become a UC citizen, assuming you weren't already one due to a player trait. You can also get the Dream Home trait, and as long as you pay off the mortgage on it, then you've got probably one of the best player homes in the game. So the only reason you'd really need an outpost as a home is if it's on a planet whose environment you enjoy, or that has a really nice scenic view. Of course, there's also the fact that the player's own ship can act as a home, albeit one that's mobile. Even if you need to offload a bunch of stuff you've collected while out questing or exploring planets, you could just do so at one of the player homes in the major cities, which you'll probably need to return to anyway just to sell loot, turn in and accept new quests, or to repair and build your ship. Then there's outposts as centers of resource gathering, which I think is the primary reason to actually build them. Resources are used to help the player further expand their outposts, such as taking aluminum and iron gathered by extractors to be used at a workbench to make adaptive frames, which enable the player to construct more buildings and to decorate the interiors of those buildings with furnishings. They can also use the resources for crafting modifications for their spacesuits, weapons, food, and chems. Alternatively, the player can just sell these resources in order to make money, which seems to be what most players end up doing. But there are plenty of other ways to make money in Starfield, and it's not so difficult that one would need to take the time to establish a resource or manufacturing outpost in order to achieve that. And in regards to crafting, I found it's much easier for me to just directly buy the ingredients I need to make whatever modifications I want to weapons, spacesuits, or to complete research projects. You could set up an outpost that has a radar array that makes scanning a planet easier, but I found that's really more of a temporary benefit for achieving 100% exploration on a planet or moon. So, there needs to be a third major reason for players to engage with the outpost system. And I think one great solution is to have a faction that's dedicated to outpost building. In Fallout 4, this faction was the Minutemen. Initially, it seems that Starfield doesn't have an equivalent faction, except that it does. That faction is called LIST, which stands for the League of Independent Settlers. There isn't a whole lot of information about LIST, But they're basically an organization that provides colonists with a ship and supplies to settle a new planet. You can run into list colonists as a random encounter, and can choose to help them repair their ship to reach their designated planet. There's also a quest where you help out some list colonists fight off a group of spacers. But that's the extent of the player's interaction with List, except for talking to a member named Phil Hill in Sidonia. You can sell some survey data to him and help advertise List to other people, but again, there's nothing involving actual outpost construction. It would have been better if you could actually go to where the League's headquarters was located and pick up quests for them that require the player to help establish outposts in various star systems. There could even be requirements for the type of outpost that they set up. For example, one quest could require the player to set up an outpost on a temperate planet that is specialized in farming. Another could be establishing a refueling station on a moon that has helium-3 for trade ships passing through that system. This would add variety to the kinds of outposts that the player would have to construct, so that they wouldn't have to focus solely on generic colonies. In addition, the player could be required to construct a certain number of hab buildings, landing pads, and/or extractors in order for the outpost to be considered complete. And once the player meets the minimum requirements, they can return to the List HQ and get paid out some credits as a reward, or maybe even unlock new buildings or furnishings they can construct for their own outposts and player homes. Alternatively, the player could receive quests from either the United Colonies or Freestar Collective that require them to set up military outposts in neutral star systems, which could add tension to the supposedly precarious peace that both factions have between each other. You could also have a feature where the more the player helps out one faction with setting up outposts and expanding their influence in a neutral star system, it reduces the player's reputation with another. Of course, that would add actual consequence to the player's actions, which the game currently lacks, but that's a whole other topic that's been prevalent in most of Bethesda's games. At least the games that I've played, which is Fallout 3, Skyrim, Fallout 4, and now Starfield. Unlike Fallout 4, Starfield allows the player to construct entire buildings, and not just floors, walls, and roofs that, when properly combined, make a building. This is a change that I'm fine with, especially since Bethesda added in this top-down camera view, which I think is the best addition to the base building system, on top of being able to drop an outpost down almost anywhere on a planet. However, the number of hab buildings that you get to construct is pretty lackluster. You do get a decent variety of options in terms of power generating buildings like wind turbines, solar, and helium generators. Extractors are broken down between gas and minerals, and depending on your skill in outpost engineering, you can get improved versions of them. Design-wise, the buildings are pretty boring and lack variety, which I think is unnecessary. More specifically, why are there not any Aquila City-themed buildings to construct? It would have been nice to be able to make a base with a space western theme. Or maybe there could have been some structures themed after House Varun, though as far as I'm aware you can't actually visit House Varun's homeworld, but you can get an idea of the faction's design aesthetic based off its weapons and spacesuits. Overall, I think Bethesda should have taken more inspiration from RTS games. Take Command & Conquer 3 as an example. Brotherhood of Nod buildings have their own distinct design compared to GDI's buildings. StarCraft is another great example, with the Terran, Protoss, and Zerg all having their own unique look. Just like how you can have ship habs dedicated to crew quarters, workshop, infirmary, or armories, it would have been great to have buildings dedicated to a similar function that have their own unique design. For example, what if there was a barracks or crew quarters building type where companions assigned to outposts could sleep at? Or an armory where the player can store extra weapons and gear? Sure, the player could just turn one of the generic buildings into an armory with the proper custom furnishings. But I think enabling the player to construct a unique-looking building that is already furnished in such a way would have been a great option, especially for players who either don't have much time to spend furnishing the interiors, or are not the best when it comes to interior design, but still want their buildings to feel lived in. I get that Bethesda was supposedly trying to go for this NASA punk aesthetic, but I don't think they really pushed that design as far as they could have when it comes to the Outpost buildings. They should have gone for buildings that were more exaggerated in terms of their design. And I know some people might say that the buildings would then be unrealistic looking, but this is a game where space magic exists. So for me, that argument doesn't really hold up. One thing I do like, though, is the ability to add or remove windows from walls, and how some habs have a variety of window designs to choose from. Oh, and by the way, if you're having difficulty rotating buildings, you can go into the options screen and adjust the sensitivity of the rotation speed, as well as the panning speed of the top-down camera. Unfortunately, there is no snap rotation option for those who want the ability to get more accurate alignments. I think another thing that could be done is to tie outposts to planetary traits. Planetary traits are these points of interest that the player can find when exploring a planet or moon, and they can range from being a meteorite impact site, a cluster of crystals, or a biome of alien flora. Unfortunately, traits don't really do anything except contribute to fully exploring a planet. Initially, I thought that I could build an outpost next to a trait and harvest whatever unique resources it provided. But actually, the game doesn't allow you to place a beacon next to them. You can place it further away from the trait, but most of the time, the beacon radius will get cut off as soon as it hits the trait's zone of influence, thereby preventing the player from constructing anything close to the trait. It would have been cool to have planetary traits actually provide a unique resource or some other gameplay benefit for players if they were allowed to construct an outpost next to them. Each trait could have its own extractor building dedicated to harvesting or enhancing the trait's benefit. Take the crystalline cluster, for example. If the cluster is within the radius of a player's outpost, the player could be able to construct some kind of giant extractor drill type building over the cluster that could harvest the crystals. Think similar to the refinery that can be built over a Vespene gas geyser from StarCraft. This kind of building would require a lot of materials to construct, but once done, the crystals it extract could be either sold for lots of credits, like at a premium, or, even better, could be used as an exotic ingredient to craft unique weapons, spacesuits, ship modules, or just other modifications. Alternatively, the player could build robots specially designed to harvest the crystals. Another thing Bethesda could do is bring back a more basic version of the happiness mechanic from Fallout 4's settlement system. Certain planetary traits, like the Lush Grove, could provide a substantial boost to happiness for crew members living at an outpost next to the grove. Alternatively, some traits could cause reduced happiness in exchange for, some other benefit, or in exchange for the ability to actually harvest the resources that trait provides. I think Bethesda should also bring back stores and merchants to Outposts, making it easier for the player to buy and sell materials with. I'm not exactly sure why these weren't available to begin with, as, again, they were present in Fallout 4, but they could be unlockable as part of the third rank of the Outpost engineering skill. Finally, enabling the player to decorate their house or outpost with furnishings and other decorations is a great idea. However, the system is missing some very basic quality of life improvements. And because of this, furnishing one's outpost or player home is a tedious affair. For one, any materials or miscellaneous items I place inside a storage crate have to first be removed from the crate and kept in my character's inventory before they can be used to build furniture or be placed on a shelf. This step feels completely unnecessary. As long as that crate is within the bounds of an outpost or inside a player home, any items or resources that are inside that crate should automatically be referenced by the building system, which would enable the player to construct whatever they want without having to continuously access the crate or several crates and overburdening themselves with the necessary construction materials. Then there's the issue of placing items in order to decorate one's home or outpost. Let's say I have an item that I want to add to a shelf. In order for me to add this item, I first have to open up my inventory, find the item, and drop it on the ground. I then have to pick up the item and place it on the shelf. It seems pretty straightforward, except for the part where I have to drop the item first before being able to pick it up. This is another step that is completely unnecessary, as my character should be able to access the item from their inventory through the build screen. This issue was actually solved in Fallout 4 by a mod called OC Decorator. I'm not sure why Bethesda couldn't have just implemented their own version of that mod into Starfield. Also, placing items on shelves through the builder is particularly infuriating, as the item always defaults to the shelf that is head level with the main character. Now, I could place the item on any of the shelves outside the builder mode, but the problem with this method is that the item won't stick in place if the player bumps into it, or if an explosion caused by a grenade sends the item or items flying off the shelf. While yes, it's realistic for the items to fall off the shelf under such circumstances, it's frustrating to have to spend so much time hand placing a bunch of decor just for it to get knocked down and have to spend even more time putting it back into place. It makes me think, why bother spending all that time decorating your home or outpost when they could get easily knocked out of place? Placing objects in builder mode solves this issue, but the system is inconsistent due to how object collision works in the game. Just adding a toggle collision on and off button to the builder mode would probably resolve this issue. Then of course, there's still the problem of objects falling halfway through a solid surface, if not all the way through, whenever a player leaves and returns to their home or outpost. One workaround for the whole decorating process would be to reintroduce stewards into the game. Whenever the player bought a house in Skyrim, they could go to a steward and just pay them to have their house furnished. I'm not suggesting that Bethesda totally replace the decoration builder with a steward, but I do think the option should at least be available to those who don't want to have to deal with the frustrations associated with manual decoration. Anyway, those are my criticisms and possible solutions for how to improve the base building system in Starfield. Overall, I think the system is a step back compared to the settlement system of Fallout 4. The top-down camera and ability to construct outposts almost anywhere are the two main improvements to the system, but I was expecting more than that. I think it really comes down to whether or not Bethesda considers base building to be a core feature of not just Starfield, but all their future games. Regardless of whether one liked or disliked settlements in Fallout 4, it was absolutely a core feature of that game. But with Starfield, I don't think it is. At best, it's this half-baked secondary feature that their game designers, who could have been working on more important things, had to develop for the game. A part of me thinks it would have been better if those designers just worked on adding more handcrafted side quests or purchasable player homes rather than spend time on this secondary feature. I'm also wondering if this is because of the backlash Bethesda received for requiring players to engage with these settlements in Fallout 4, especially when it came to completing that game's main quest. I think Bethesda made the right choice in not tying Outposts to the main quest of Starfield, but not having them tied to any side quests, planetary traits, or factions like the League of Independent Settlers hampers any reason for players to really engage with the system to begin with. I'm optimistic that Bethesda will probably add new buildings or decorations to constructed outposts like they did with settlements in Fallout 4, but I'm doubtful they'll add any depth to the system from a game design perspective. They'll probably end up leaving that to modders, which I have mixed feelings about. On one hand, it's great that modders can step in and provide much needed depth to features that are lacking it. But on the other hand, Bethesda should be taking responsibility for doing that on their end, especially since they were the ones that introduced the system to the game in the first place. And that's one of the major issues I've noticed with Bethesda as a developer. They're happy to introduce new features to their games, yet they are reluctant to add any real depth to those features and improve upon them in a meaningful way. Or, at the very least, they are inconsistent with what features have depth and which ones don't. For example, I would say that shipbuilding in Starfield has a decent level of depth to it. And that just feels off to me, considering they already had a foundation to build off of with settlements in Fallout 4. Anyway, I think that's enough rambling about my disappointment in Starfield's Outpost. I'd recommend people just stick to doing the side quests in the game, since in my opinion they are the strongest aspect of Starfield, as they are with Bethesda's previous games, really. They're better than building outposts and exploring soulless procedurally generated environments. But for those who have played Starfield, let me know in the comments what y'all think about Outposts. And what ideas would you come up with to improve the system? Anyway, I hope to be back next time with another Command & Conquer video. So until then, bye for now.